tributes continue to pour in for Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, with many describing him as a political giant. But his legacy is a contentious one.
Absolutely. The eNCA Freedom Party founder died yesterday morning, aged 95. For more on this, we are joined by veteran journalist Cyril Madlala. Cyril, good morning. Thank you so much for your time. As we've said, Buthelezi's legacy is a contentious one, controversial, some might say. What's your take on it?
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. He's a very, very interesting character. For having been around for so long, obviously we would have had time to have a good look at his history. But one thing I can say is that it's a very polarized character, and there are so many contradictions around him. But having been around, with hindsight, it's much easier for us to look at what should have happened and how he could have handled different situations. Going back to his time when he had to set up or get involved in the setting up of the Zulu Tribal Authority right up to now in 2023. So we have been able to pick up a whole lot of contradictions along the way, whether this is a man of peace, this is a man of violence, or this is a very religious person, a very strong Christian, or a Zulu traditionalist, one struggled really to reconcile some contradictions in his life. But it has been a very complex and very colorful life.
As you said, colorful and complex, some contradictions, and you have had the opportunity to report of many of his doings. What then is your conclusion, having reported for all these years on his life, of his legacy?
I think, many books have been written about him already. But I think many, many more still have to be written for us to have a comprehensive picture of the man. I don't think that will be possible because as years went by, it seemed to us that we had not yet got to understand the complexity of the man and to understand and anticipate how he would respond to different situations. I think we still need to take time to reflect on that. And see if we can still capture the real man that Mangosuthu Buthelezi was. But one thing that we can't deny is that we could not ignore him. History can't ignore him, whether we look at it positively or negatively. He has been a reference point of South African politics for many, many years. And we still need to go back and start from where he was and reference that to whatever will be happening in the future. Whether you're looking at the Zulu Kingdom, whether you're looking at the future of the IFP, whether we are looking at the politics of South Africa in general.
Cyril, thanks for bringing up the documented history, and as far as the literature is concerned, one of those books that springs to mind is the Gatsha Buthelezi, Chief with a Double Agenda, Mzala. I imagine you've read that book or you've come across it at some time during your career. Let's talk about the alleged incitement of black-on-black violence at the hands of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi pre-94. What was your assessment, and over time, what have you uncovered?
In fact, that is one of the contradictions about the man. You remember that he was against the armed struggle, and for many years he was preaching that he was against the violence of any form. But what we saw in KZN and Gauteng in the 80s showed us a different kind of picture about the man. The fact that he had to apologize, in fact, more than once, he apologized publicly about involvement for the involvement of his supporters in the violence. You would be amazed, you'd be surprised that, why would he need to go to that extent to apologize for such violence when he was a man of peace? How do you reconcile, such violence involving his supporters and his pronounced position that he's a person who is very much against the armed struggle and certainly against political violence?
Cyril, having reported on Prince Buthelezi numerous times, what were some of the most interesting occasions or happenings that you reported on concerning his life?
No, there are so many. One thing, I think many journalists would attest to this, is that he had a very, very sharp intellect. The way he responded to questions, even from the most junior of journalists, the way he engaged with our international colleagues, from some of the prestigious news outlets in the world, you see that he was well read, and he understood journalism and how to manipulate public opinion, taking full advantage of the media. And obviously, many of us will recall, his very deep memory. He could recall events that happened so many years ago. If you wrote anything about him that he didn't like, he would be able to draw from his files, that in going back many years, you said this about me and you said this about me, and you'd always be amazed how he managed to get all that. Obviously, over the years, I've come to know that he has a very extensive archiving system, and a museum has been built in Ulundi where his documents are all kept there. In fact, it should be fascinating to have full access to all the records, to all the information that over the years he meticulously kept in place and preserved for generations to come. I think scholars would still need to go there and get a better grasp of how he came to see things and what informed some of his decisions, maybe.
In fact, as recently as 4 months ago, you wrote an opinion piece about his role within the Zulu monarchy, Cyril. And you were basically just highlighting what is beyond dispute is that for nearly 7 decades, Buthelezi has singularly crafted the legacy of the institution that is the current Zulu monarchy. With him gone, where does that leave things right now? We know there's a very volatile environment within the corridors of the royal house.
Yes, most certainly. If you recall, in terms of history, the Zulu kingdom was destroyed. The Zulus were conquered, by the colonizers. So that Zulu kingdom, as it had been constituted, from the days of King Shaka and so on, that was destroyed completely. So it was Prince Buthelezi who took the initiative to revive it. And in fact, when King Cyprian was installed as paramount chief, as it was called then, he had to get other chiefs, to agree to endorse him as paramount chief, as it was called then. So this has been his project, and I believe that he has molded it in the way he wanted to mold it, and that's why it's very difficult for him now, towards the latter part of his life, when some members of the royal family wanted to have him excluded from the whole process of installing the new king. In fact, what's going to be very interesting is I even doubt that King Mangosuthu will be able to go forward without Prince Buthelezi's involvement, because he was the one that was standing up for him when members of his own royal family, King Mangosuthu's own family, didn't want him to be installed as king. So now that Buthelezi is gone, it's going to be very interesting to see how that will be managed going forward.
Cyril, as you said earlier, Prince Buthelezi's life has been well documented by you amongst other journalists as well. Now that he has transitioned, do you think there will be more details about his life unearthed, or do you believe we've exhausted it all?
I don't think we can exhaust it. Obviously, we had access to him because he didn't mind talking to the media. In fact, he had time to entertain even the most junior among us, because he did like to teach us about history. Many of us had to endure many hours into his version of history, because he had his own understanding of how things had evolved. So you'd always need to challenge him and take that up with him to say, no, but this is not how this happened. The origins of the violence in KZN, whether he actually was a prince, whether he boycotted the negotiations, whether he was a man of peace or not. He would always have his own version and his own understanding of how those things had evolved. But what I thought he managed to do or strive very much to achieve towards the end of his life was to ensure that his version of history remained for posterity. Many among us obviously would challenge that, would say, no, this is not how things happened. But he went out of his way to ensure that his own version of history is well documented. And I can promise you, it is very well documented. Every speech he ever made is filed somewhere. You can go back many, many years ago. I heard recently that he had not apologized for the violence. I can recall reading the speech he made at a prayer breakfast in Durban in 1991, where he actually broke down and cried when he was apologizing for the involvement of the IFP in the violence. So things like that can still be researched. You can go to the archives and learn more about the man.
And of course, he was also very instrumental, Cyril, in the setting up or just putting together the Ingonyama Trust Land Act. He was the, call it the brains behind it, right? With him gone, where does that put things, especially now that you've just mentioned that the reign of King Misuzulu will be somewhat on shaky ground without Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi?
That is going to be a major challenge because there is now contestation around the origin of the Ingonyama Trust, and how that it came about. King Misuzulu seems to think that it's for him to inherit. It was for his father, and then now that he is king, he inherits it. Whereas I think Buthelezi's understanding is quite different. That the king holds the land. Amakhosi hold the land on behalf of Isilo, but it's not for Isilo to do as he pleases with the land. So he would need Amakhosi's concurrence, for whatever happens. And I know for a fact that Amakhosi are still very close or were still very close to Buthelezi until the last days of his life. So Isilo Misuzulu now would still need to do that groundwork to win them over and convince them that the days of Buthelezi are gone, and now this is the new way of doing things.
Sure, Cyril, from your observation then, who is there that is still available to fill this gap, this worrying gap that you are referring to?
I don't think there would be anybody else. Certainly, for this long, Buthelezi had an opportunity to craft this from start, to mold it, as I say, the way he wanted to have it molded. So I think anybody else, first of all, I doubt that anybody could replace him in the sense that have the same understanding, the same, drive, the same passion for the preservation of land. You remember that during the negotiations, he was pushing for the king, in fact, to insist that the land of the Zulus should be restored to their pre-1834 boundaries. That's way back. So whatever little pockets of land were kept under the Zulu kingdom, it was a major achievement, because you remember that all these pieces had been scattered all over the province, and he was trying to consolidate that to give some semblance of restoration of the Zulu kingdom as it had been pre-1834. But obviously that would not have been possible, and I personally doubt that anybody else could take that further forward.
Sure, that's indeed worrying and can have far-reaching consequences. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and observations with us. That was the veteran journalist Cyril Madlala.